Look, I know what you're thinking when you hear about a woman calling her husband's affection creepy, but honestly, sometimes love can feel suffocating when you're drowning in everything else. I mean, there I was, stressed out of my mind, and he's still trying to grab my ass in the kitchen like we're teenagers. But apparently wanting some space makes me the bad guy in everyone's story. So, Leo and I had this thing, right? Like this ridiculous sexual chemistry that made our friends roll their eyes. He couldn't keep his hands off me. Literally, I'd be making coffee in the morning and he'd come up behind me, pressing himself against me, whispering stupid shit like, "God, you're so fucking hot," in my ear. And okay, fine. It was flattering at first, made me feel desired and all that. But here's what nobody tells you about being with a guy who's completely obsessed with you. It gets exhausting. Like, I couldn't walk past him without getting grabbed, kissed, or having him make some comment about my body. Even when I was clearly busy or stressed, there he was acting like I was his personal sex toy. Work was getting brutal. My manager was breathing down my neck about numbers. Customers were being absolute nightmares, and I was coming home mentally drained. But did Leo care? Nope. The second I walked through the door, he's there with his hands all over me, talking about how he missed me and how good I looked, even though I felt like trash. I started pulling away, just needing some space to decompress. But Leo, he took that as a challenge. More surprise kisses, more random groping, more of his romantic bullshit that felt more like harassment when I'm trying to pay bills or watch TV in peace. The worst part was how he'd act all innocent about it. Like I'd be venting about my day and he'd start massaging my shoulders, which sounds sweet until his hands start wandering and suddenly he's kissing my neck while I'm trying to tell him about the clusterfuck at work. Then he'd get this hurt look when I'd pull away. Like I was rejecting him personally instead of just wanting 5 fucking minutes to exist without being touched. And don't even get me started on his little jokes. He'd walk past me and mutter, "Marry me," even though we were already married, or leave notes in my lunch about how he couldn't wait to unwrap me later. It was like living with a horny teenager who thought he was being romantic. I tried talking to him about it, explaining that I needed some physical space when I was stressed. You know what he said? "But I love touching you. It's how I show affection." As if that made it okay to ignore what I was telling him I needed. Looking back, maybe I should have been clearer. But honestly, when you're already overwhelmed and someone keeps pushing your boundaries because it makes them feel good, it starts feeling less like love and more like selfishness. He was getting what he needed, constant physical contact and validation. But what about what I needed? The breaking point came when I was having the worst day at work. My district manager had basically told me my job was on the line if numbers didn't improve, and I came home ready to cry. Leo's immediate response was to pull me into this long, handsy hug and start kissing all over my face, telling me how much better he could make me feel. I just snapped, pushed him away, and said I needed space, that his constant touching was making everything worse. And he looked at me like I'd slapped him. Actually said, "Since when is loving my wife a bad thing?" That's when I realized we had a serious problem because in his mind, his needs and desires were just love, and my need for boundaries was me being difficult. After that fight, Leo went into what I can only describe as hurt puppy mode. Suddenly, he's walking on eggshells, barely touching me, acting like I might bite him if he got too close. And honestly, it was exactly what I needed. But of course, he had to make it weird. He'd reach for me and then catch himself pulling back with this wounded expression, or he'd start to say something flirty and then stop mid-sentence, shaking his head like he was reminding himself not to be inappropriate. The drama was exhausting, but the space felt good. I could come home and actually decompress without worrying about being groped or having to perform affection when I was drained. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe in my own house. Work started getting better too. Without the constant stress of coming home to Leo's overwhelming neediness, I could actually focus on fixing the problems instead of just surviving them. My numbers improved. My manager backed off, and I started feeling like myself again. The problem was Leo couldn't handle the new dynamic. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments like, "Sorry for existing in my own house," when he'd try to sit next to me on the couch and I wouldn't immediately cuddle up to him. Or he'd sigh dramatically when I'd go to bed without giving him his usual goodnight makeout session. I tried to explain that I wasn't rejecting him as a person, just needing different kinds of affection. Maybe we could talk more, do activities together that didn't involve him pawing at me every 5 seconds, but he acted like I was asking him to become a completely different person. This isn't me, he'd say. I'm a physical person. That's how I connect. As if I was supposed to just accept that his way of connecting required me to be available for groping whenever he felt like it. The worst part was how he started acting like he was doing me this huge favor by not touching me. Like he was being so respectful and considerate and I should be grateful. But then he'd make comments about how hard it was for him, how unnatural it felt, how he missed his wife. I started feeling guilty, which pissed me off. Here, I was finally getting the space I needed to function like a human being, and he was making me feel bad about it. Like my mental health and comfort were less important than his need to constantly validate himself through physical contact. Things got weird when I started enjoying the distance. Without the constant pressure to be sexually available, I rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten about. I started reading again, picked up hobbies, actually had energy for friends. It was like I'd been suffocating and finally learned how to breathe. But Leo saw my happiness as evidence that I didn't need him anymore. He'd make bitter comments about how much better I seemed without his creepy affection. Throwing my words back at me like that was supposed to make me feel bad for setting boundaries. The turning point came about 3 months into our new arrangement. I'd had an amazing day at work. Finally hit my targets. Got praised by the district manager. Felt like I was crushing it. I came home excited to share the news. And Leo's first response was, "Wow, you're glowing. Must be nice not having your gross husband all over you." Instead of being happy for me, he was bitter that my success coincided with his forced distance. That's when I realized this wasn't about physical affection at all. It was about control. He needed to be the source of my happiness. And when I found it elsewhere, he couldn't handle it. When the company offered me a week-long training conference, Leo's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Instead of being supportive or proud that I was being trusted with professional development, he got sulky about me leaving. Made comments about how I'd probably be relieved to get away from him. The conference was in Dallas, and honestly, it felt like vacation. No tiptoeing around Leo's feelings. No managing his emotional neediness. Just me focusing on work and networking with colleagues who saw me as competent and valuable. That's where I met this trainer, Julian, mid-30s, divorced. Completely different energy from Leo. Where Leo was intense and overwhelming, Julian was laid back and easy to talk to. We ended up grabbing drinks after the sessions, talking about work, life, everything. And here's the thing, Julian flirted with me. Not aggressively. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable. Just normal adult flirtation. Compliments that felt genuine. Attention that felt chosen rather than desperate. When he touched my arm during conversation, it didn't feel possessive or needy. It felt nice. I'm not stupid. I knew what was happening. But after months of being made to feel like wanting personal space made me a cold bitch. Having someone appreciate me without immediately wanting to consume me felt incredible. Nothing happened. Not really. Just drinks, conversation, maybe some lingering looks, but the attention reminded me what it felt like to be desired without being suffocated. To have someone interested in my thoughts and opinions, not just my body. When I got home, Leo was all over me. Literally waiting by the door like a dog, wanting to hear about everything, touch me, connect, and I just couldn't. The contrast was too stark. His neediness, which I'd gotten used to managing, suddenly felt overwhelming again. He picked up on my mood immediately. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" And the way he asked, suspicious, possessive, like he owned my emotional state, irritated me more than it should have. I told him nothing happened, which was technically true, but I could see him analyzing every word, looking for evidence that I'd somehow betrayed him by having a good time without him. The interrogation disguised as concern was exhausting. That night, he tried to initiate sex for the first time in months. Not in a romantic way, but in this desperate, claiming way that made my skin crawl, like he needed to mark his territory after I'd been gone. When I wasn't enthusiastic, he got hurt and accusatory. "I thought you missed me," he said. Like my physical availability was proof of my feelings. "I thought you'd want to reconnect." But that was the problem. He thought reconnecting meant sex, not conversation. He wanted to reclaim me physically without bothering to reconnect with me emotionally. It was all about his needs, his insecurity, his desire to feel wanted. I started comparing everything. How Julian had asked thoughtful questions about my work versus how Leo just wanted to know if I'd missed him. How Julian's touch felt respectful versus Leo's grabby desperation. How comfortable I'd felt being myself versus how exhausted I was managing Leo's emotions. The worst part was realizing that I hadn't missed Leo at all during that week. If anything, I'd felt free, and coming home to his immediate emotional demands felt like being suffocated all over again. That's when I started seriously questioning our marriage. Not because of Julian specifically, but because that week had shown me what it felt like to exist without constantly managing someone else's neediness, and I liked it a lot. The breaking point came about a month after the conference. Leo had gone back to his old patterns: constant touching, possessive affection, treating my body like his personal stress relief. Except now I couldn't pretend it was romantic anymore. I'd been thinking about Julian more than I should have. Nothing inappropriate, just remembering what it felt like to have normal adult conversations without someone immediately trying to turn it sexual. We had exchanged a few work emails, professional but friendly, and even that small connection felt more satisfying than most of my interactions with Leo. One evening, Leo started his usual routine. I was paying bills at the kitchen table, clearly busy and stressed about money, and he came up behind me for one of his spontaneous neck kisses. When I tensed up, he didn't stop. If anything, he doubled down like my resistance was just foreplay. Leo, stop. I'm trying to concentrate. Come on, babe. You've been so tense lately. Let me help you relax. He kept going, hands wandering, completely ignoring that I'd asked him to stop. Like my words were just background noise to his horny narrative. I shoved him away harder than necessary. I said, "Stop. Why can't you just listen when I tell you no?" And that's when he exploded. All that hurt puppy shit disappeared, replaced by anger and resentment. Because you never want me to touch you anymore. You act like I'm some kind of predator for wanting affection from my own wife. Wanting affection is fine. Ignoring when I say no is not. When do you ever say yes anymore? When is it ever a good time for you? And honestly, he had a point. I couldn't remember the last time I genuinely wanted his physical attention, but instead of examining why that might be, I just got defensive. Maybe because you make it feel like an obligation. Everything has to be sexual with you. I can't even vent about work without you trying to turn it into foreplay. That's what married couples do. They support each other. They're intimate with each other. Support would be listening, not groping me while I'm trying to talk. We went around and around, both getting meaner, both digging into years of resentment. He brought up how I changed, how I used to love his attention, how I was punishing him for being attracted to his own wife. I brought up his neediness, his inability to read the room, how suffocating his constant demands felt. But here's where I probably went too far. In the heat of the argument, I said something I'd been thinking but never planned to voice. Maybe I wouldn't need space if you weren't so desperate all the time. It's honestly creepy how much you need validation from me. The word creepy hit him like a physical blow. His expression shifted completely, and I knew I'd crossed the line. Not because I was wrong necessarily, but because I'd said it in the cruelest way possible. Creepy, he repeated quietly. My wife thinks I'm creepy for loving her. I tried to backtrack, explain that I didn't mean him specifically, just the behavior, but the damage was done. Something shut off in his eyes, and I realized I'd probably just killed whatever was left of our marriage. He didn't yell anymore, just looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time and didn't like what he saw. Good to know where we stand, he said, and walked out of the room. That night, he slept in the guest room. And for the first time in months, instead of feeling guilty about hurting him, I felt relieved, like I could finally stop pretending this was fixable. The next few weeks were the most honest our marriage had ever been, which is probably why it fell apart so quickly. Leo stopped pretending to be okay with our situation, and I stopped pretending I wanted to fix it. He became cold in a way I'd never seen before. Not angry or hurt, just detached. He'd come home, eat dinner in silence, and disappear into his office or the guest room. When I tried to talk to him about normal stuff, bills, plans, basic life maintenance, he'd respond with the bare minimum, polite, but distant, like I was a roommate he barely tolerated. Part of me was relieved, no more managing his emotions or defending my need for space. But another part was unsettled by how easily he disconnected. Like all those months of him claiming he needed constant affection were just manipulation. And when it stopped working, he could turn it off completely. I started reaching out to Julian more. Just work stuff at first. Then gradually more personal conversations. He was going through his own divorce stuff. Understood the complexity of relationships falling apart. Our emails got longer, more frequent, and I found myself looking forward to them in a way that made me uncomfortable. Leo noticed my mood improving and made a bitter comment about how much happier I seemed without his creepy presence. I didn't deny it, which probably confirmed whatever he was thinking about our marriage. The conversation that ended everything happened on a Tuesday. Leo came home from work and found me laughing at something on my phone, one of Julian's emails. Instead of asking what was funny or trying to connect, he just watched me with this calculating look. "We need to talk," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table like we were negotiating a business deal. I knew what was coming, but I let him say it first. "I don't think this is working anymore. We're not compatible sexually, and apparently I'm too creepy to be around." I could have fought him on it, tried to save things, suggested counseling again. Instead, I felt this weird sense of relief. "You're probably right." He looked surprised that I agreed so easily. Maybe he expected me to argue or get emotional, but honestly, I was exhausted from pretending we could fix something that was fundamentally broken. "I've been thinking the same thing," I admitted. "We want different things. You need more physical connection than I can give, and I need more space than you're comfortable with." We talked logistics like adults. Who would move out? Him. How to split things. When to tell people? It was weirdly civilized for two people ending a marriage. The only moment he showed real emotion was when I mentioned that maybe we'd both be happier with people who better matched our needs. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe. Or recognition that I'd already started thinking about other people. "Already got someone in mind?" he asked. And there was an edge to his voice. "It's not about someone else," I lied smoothly. "It's about us not being right for each other." He moved out the following weekend. No drama, no big fight, just boxes and awkward politeness. When he left, instead of sadness, I felt like I could breathe fully for the first time in years. I texted Julian that night, told him I was getting divorced, that things had been over for a while, that I was looking forward to starting fresh. He called instead of texting back, and we talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. 3 months later, when the divorce was finalized, Julian flew in for a weekend. Nothing serious, just two adults who enjoyed each other's company, exploring what that might look like without the complications of marriage and distance. It felt easy in a way that made me realize how hard everything with Leo had been. Julian and I dated for about 4 months before reality hit. Turns out long-distance relationships are hard even when you're not married to someone else. The easy conversation and chemistry we had during stolen phone calls and weekend visits didn't translate well to the practical realities of trying to build something real. He was dealing with his own messy divorce. His ex-wife was making custody difficult, and his job had him traveling constantly. I was adjusting to single life, trying to figure out who I was without having to manage someone else's emotions all the time. We were both rebounding, basically, and eventually admitted it wasn't going anywhere serious. The breakup was mutual and mature, which somehow made it worse. With Leo, at least there had been passion and intensity, even when it was suffocating. With Julian, everything just fizzled. Like we'd been playing house with the idea of being together without actually building anything substantial. I threw myself into work and started exploring dating apps, figuring I needed to understand what I actually wanted instead of just running from what I didn't. That's where I met Sloane at a coffee shop. She was on her phone, sounding frustrated about a date that had stood her up. We started talking, and for the first time in forever, I felt genuinely curious about someone. Sloane was confident without being needy, funny without trying too hard. And when she asked for my number, it felt natural in a way that surprised me. Dating a woman was different than I'd expected, not just physically, but emotionally. Sloane didn't make me feel like I had to be constantly available or manage her insecurities. She had her own life, her own interests, and wasn't looking for me to complete her or validate her existence. For a few months, I felt like I'd figured it out. Found someone who matched my need for independence with genuine connection. Sloane didn't smother me with attention or make me feel guilty for having boundaries. We had fun together without it feeling like work. But then Sloane started pulling back, making comments about how I never seemed to really open up, about how I kept her at arm's length even during intimate moments. She said I seemed more comfortable talking about what I didn't want in relationships than what I actually did want. It's like you're still defining yourself by your ex-husband instead of figuring out who you are, she said during our last real conversation. Every time we get close, you put up walls. The accusation stung because I could see the truth in it. I had gotten so used to protecting myself from Leo's overwhelming neediness that I'd never learned how to be vulnerable with someone who wasn't trying to consume me. Sloane broke up with me over text 2 weeks later. Said she cared about me, but felt like she was dating someone who was still more interested in not being her ex-husband's wife than in actually being present in our relationship. That's when Leo's friend Grant reached out, apparently feeling guilty about something, told me Leo had met someone at work. A nurse named Eliza, who thought he was the sweetest guy she'd ever dated, said Leo seemed happier than he'd been in years. Like he'd found someone who actually appreciated his affectionate nature. The kicker. Grant mentioned how Eliza was always talking about how safe and loved Leo made her feel, how she'd never been with someone so attentive and caring. Everything I'd found suffocating, she saw as romantic. 2 years after our divorce, I ran into them at the grocery store. Leo looked good, relaxed in a way I'd never seen him. Eliza was laughing at something he'd said, naturally leaning into him while they looked at produce. When she kissed his cheek randomly, just because, he lit up like she'd given him the world. They didn't see me, but I watched them for a few minutes. The way he touched the small of her back while they walked, how she squeezed his hand when they passed other people. All that physical affection I'd found so overwhelming. She was initiating half the time. She actually wanted his attention. Standing there with my cart full of groceries for one, watching my ex-husband be genuinely happy with someone who appreciated what he had to offer, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I hadn't just been incompatible with Leo. I'd been cruel. I'd taken someone who loved me completely and made him feel like a predator for it. I'd called his affection creepy when really I just didn't want to be loved that much by him. And now he was with someone who did. Someone who saw his devotion as a gift instead of a burden. Someone who didn't need space from love. She wanted to live in it. I never figured out how to want someone the way Leo had wanted me. Every relationship since has been me trying to find the perfect balance between connection and independence and never quite managing it. I'm good at identifying what I don't want, terrible at building what I do want. The worst part, I still think he was too much sometimes, but watching him be exactly the right amount for someone else made me realize the problem was never really him. It was me. And now it's too late to do anything about it except live with the fact that I threw away someone who would have done anything for me because I couldn't handle being loved that completely. But honestly, I'm not sure I ever could have. Some people just aren't built for that kind of devotion. I just wish I'd figured that out before I destroyed us both trying to make it work.